If you want to start, think about how do you answer the question, so what do you do? This is such a common question, at least in English anyway. Almost anytime you meet somebody in any context you can imagine, it's easy to just ask them, so what do you do? And get the conversation going. Now, some people think of that as perhaps that's just small talk, but it doesn't have to be. If you come prepared with the right answer, I like to say this is actually the introvert's secret weapon. If you want to talk to somebody and you feel shy or you feel like, I don't know really what to talk about, you can always ask this question. You can always start with a question. And here's the thing, if you ask that question of somebody, they're pretty likely to ask it back to you. And if you are prepared with a good answer, like I suggest you should be, that can get the conversation going. Let me give you an example. Here's one of my stories from, I mentioned that one of the things I've volunteered for is this Advanced Industries Accelerator program, where the state that I live in gives money to startups who apply for money to help them grow. And what I do as a volunteer is I have helped review the applications. And so, at least in a non COVID year, we sit around a table, much like this one here, and we review all the applications and we talk about what makes some good and what makes some not so good. And we pick the ones that will advance to the next stage. So it's a way to spend, a few hours of time helping the industry, but it's also a great way to meet all these people around the table who probably have some good experience and connections. A couple of years ago, I was doing this, and as always, I make a point of at some point when there's a little break, talking to the people on either side and others, and I always start with, so what do you do? In this particular meeting, I was sitting next to a guy named Jay, and I said, so Jay, what do you do? And he said, I'm CEO of a software company, and told me a little bit about it. And then I could see him thinking, well, gee, I should ask this question back to him. And so, oh, well, Dave, what do you do? And I came prepared with an answer. I have a few answers to this question, but knowing the context of the people around me, that they were basically technical and worked in science and engineering, I said, well, I help scientists and engineers design and build rewarding careers in the private sector. Simple, short, concise, got right to the point. It was brief. It had something interesting in it. And Jay said, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. And I said, well, I'm a physicist by training. I struggled a lot to go from an academic research environment into a company. And there were a lot of things I had to learn because it's a very different environment. And so now I teach other scientists and engineers to make that transition as well. And he said, wow, I should have you talk to my son. He just finished a PhD in physics 2 years ago, and he hasn't been able to figure out how to get a job. All of a sudden, I had a coaching client. So I can't promise that kind of thing will happen in every situation, but you can, hopefully that story helps you see how this question can be such a catalyst for a good interaction. We could talk about the weather. We could talk about something that was in the news. We could do that. That would be fine. It might be uncomfortable. It might work well. Depends on you. But all of us know what we're interested in and what we want to do. And if we start around this question, so what do you do? This can be an awesome, wonderful introduction and a great way to get things going in a direction that actually is productive, that actually results in some kind of progress, which is probably what we want, right? Step 4, show a genuine interest. Right? Ask about them. That's a great way to start. People love to talk about their own interests. So if you start by asking about other people, it's a great way to start. You can always ask a question. Even if you're shy, nobody minds if you start with, hey, where do you work? What do you do? It's very important. That's how you find common interests. Now, it's also important, don't force it, right? If somehow there's not a connection there, great. Go find somebody else to talk to. So don't force it. And of course, don't talk too much about yourself. Like any relationship, let it develop and let them ask about you. And if it's just not working, don't push it. Go somewhere else. So I like to say when it comes to the principles of don't force it and don't talk too much about yourself, I like to say finding a job or even networking in general, it's a bit like dating. And what do I mean by that? Well, what I mean is we probably understand, a dating kind of scenario better. And we know that we can't just jump right into a direct question, right? I cannot approach a woman and say, hey, I need a girlfriend. Are you available? We know that that is just not going to work well. And yet, many of us imagine in a job search scenario, we can be extremely practical. It's like, hey, we're all scientists and engineers. We're very pragmatic. Why can't I just approach somebody and ask them if they have a job? Doesn't work. We're still human beings. We still need to find other interests and start with things that we're interested in and find those commonalities. That's a far better way to do it. We may be practical, we may be rational, we may be logical, but we still need to think about what we're trying to build are relationships. And so finding other things that are interesting are the way to do it. And this is really something that I see happen, reasonably often. This direct asking for a job, like I've said a few times in this webinar, that's not really what finding a job's about. I actually saw something happen at an industry association meeting a few years ago that really drove that home. I actually wrote a blog post about it, and in the blog post, I gave the two characters names: camera startup guy and desperate student. But I was at a local trade show. It was the local Photonics Industry Association that had a lot of the local companies had set up a table and were just talking about their businesses, not really to get new customers, but more so that we could all see what the industry was doing and what the new developments in the area were, just from the standpoint of understanding how photonics is going in this area. And I was talking to a friend who's a camera startup guy, a guy that had started this business building 3D cameras. And a couple of other people I knew were asking him about the samples he had there. He had parts to look at and asking him questions about how it worked. And at some point, I noticed a younger guy standing next to me with a stack of papers. And it became clear he was probably looking for a job and was hoping to insert himself into the discussion and hand a resume to camera startup guy. So I call this guy desperate student. And it was interesting because as our conversation continued, he looked really frustrated, like he was really task oriented and interested in handing him the resume. And so after a few minutes, the conversation broke up and I watched what happened. And sure enough, he got in there and he gave him whatever his pitch was and handed him a resume. And of course, because he was so direct, I could see in the eyes of my friend, he knew that he was there and he knew he was about to pounce on him. And I could see he wasn't really very interested because he doesn't know this guy. But the student was there with the intention of trying to get around to all of these companies and get them a resume, thinking in a quantity, not a quality sense, right? That if I get them all a resume, maybe one of them will hire me. This was the wrong approach. And unfortunately, he didn't realize it. It would have been far better if he had actually gotten into the technical discussion. If this company was part of his target, if it was a place he really wanted to work and he knew what he was interested in, he would have come having done some research and have some interesting questions about the camera. He would know something about them and he could get in that discussion. That's a far better way to get involved and make a much better impression on camera startup guy than being very direct and saying, I need a job. Can you give me one? That's just really not it. Saying, wow, these are really cool. And I've read something about this, but I don't understand how you fabricate these devices. Can you help me understand it? Would be far better. Let me tell you a success story. And this story comes from my own experience. Several years ago, before I started Turning Science, I still had a job and I'd been there about 6 years and I was starting to think about doing something different. I hadn't really developed a target, but I knew I was really interested in augmented reality. And there are a few companies here where I work or I live, that are involved in that technology. Well, the industry association, the Photonics Industry Association, was having a special quarterly meeting that was focusing on augmented and virtual reality. And I thought, wow, this is a great place to learn about what might be a target of mine, right? I'd done some research. I knew why I found augmented reality interesting. I'm not really a gamer. I did build a VR system with my sons just to see how this worked, and that was really cool. But I'm most interested in the potential that augmented reality has for the workplace. The idea of being able to put on a visor, and now my virtual workspace is so much bigger than my iPad, which is great, but very small, right? I can have like Minority Report, have a virtual workspace all around me. Or the idea of being on a design team and we put on our visors and we can actually work with the virtual part and take it apart and look at it in front of us before we've even paid to get the parts made, real parts. I just think it's really exciting. So I went to this meeting knowing something about the target. This is my target. I had some interesting questions I wanted to ask, and I just went there to see what I could learn. And at one point, I was having a conversation with a guy who turned out to be the CEO of one of these companies. And I just approached it and was chatting about, I think augmented reality is so interesting. Here's why I think it holds a lot of promise for the workplace. And I relayed the things I just relayed to you. And I described to him the challenges. I can understand virtual reality is simple. You put a screen in front of your eyes and it's easy to focus. But the challenge of trying to focus on things around the room and still project an image onto a retina must be really challenging. And he said, yeah, well, that is exactly the problem. It sounds like you understand something about the challenges we're facing. I can't tell you how we do it, but that is the part that we're making. And then he had realized that I had learned something about this. And he said, so what do you do? And I was prepared with a response that I thought would make sense. And I thought quickly and said, well, I don't know anything about this technology. I couldn't do that. But what I do in my current job is I am kind of a bridge, a translator between a very sophisticated technical product and a company and a customer that really doesn't understand the technology, but they need the application. And so I help translate. And he said, wow, that sounds really interesting. We might have a use for that sometime soon. Why don't you send me a resume? So this example, this story is meant to show you how, more the relationship building approach. This is how you want to approach networking. How did I do that? I came in knowing what I was interested in, why I found it interesting. I came in with some good questions, and I just asked questions about something I was genuinely interested in and found people who also wanted to talk about it. And it went from there. That's really what it's about, right? There's no pressure. You're just looking for connections. So hopefully that gives you some idea of a much better way to do it than the very direct, pragmatic asking for a job, which is not the way to do it.